What's 100% a scam, but we accepted it in our society? That dental isn't part of medical insurance by default. As an academic scientist, pick one of these two. We use taxpayer money to fund biomedical research, which we then write up into a research study and pay the journals so that they can publish the said study, only for the journals to turn around and put them behind a paywall. We also use taxpayer money to fund years of biomedical research, which occasionally results in a groundbreaking drug/treatment, which then gets licensed out, usually, by a pharma company, which then marks up the price and turns around and charges the taxpayer an absurd amount of money to use the said drug. Edit. Additional salt to the wound. Do you guys know Moderna, which made the mRNA COVID vaccine, and the NIH, the federal institute that performed initial preclinical research on the mRNA vaccine and also literally funded the research, are in a patent dispute over the vaccine? A fee to pay your bill. Subscription services for fucking everything. That health insurance doesn't cover your eyes or teeth. Arbitration clauses in almost every service provider contract, tricking you into giving up your access to the court system. Nobody talks about it, but they should. The right, or refused right, to repair. Absolute bullshit that I can't fix my own shit. Service fees on tickets. Unpaid lunches that extend your workday. Convenience fees on electronic payments. The price of printer ink. Ticketmaster. Diamonds. Claw machines. TurboTax. They lobby the government to make it difficult to do taxes without their software. I lived in the UK and it took literally 15 minutes to do taxes on bad government software. Redditors, what is the most fucked up thing you have ever done? I'm a recovered heroin addict, 9 years sober, and I have a lot of stories of how much of a shit person I used to be. I really can't gauge what my worst moment would be, but I can post a story or two definitely. One day, I was flat broken on my last bag of dope. My neighborhood pharmacist just recently was arrested for a DUI. Brainstorming, I came up with an idea to try and get some pills at the ER. I still had med insurance at the moment, so I thought this was my best option. My buddy came by and we were hanging out outside smoking a cigarette and trying to figure out how to get hurt, just enough to get some pills, but not enough to actually have permanent repercussions. There was this big ass cinder block beside my garage and I decided to drop it on my foot in hopes of just breaking a toe at most. I stood outside on the concrete patio for about 5 minutes with the cinder block trying to hype myself up enough to drop it on my foot. I couldn't do it, psyched myself out too much. I told my friend that he would have to do it for me, and he said okay. He held it about waist high and dropped it on my foot. I knew it wasn't enough damage, so I told him that he needed to put it up higher and drop it again, to which he did. So go to the hospital, tell them that I was carrying boxes downstairs to the basement and dropped them when I slipped on the bottom step, so I go back, get x-rays, and I am in the waiting room. Doctor comes in and tells me that I've torn numerous ligaments in my foot and probably would hurt less if I had just broke my foot. Hearing this I was excited, thinking yes, I just scored. I didn't care about the pain at the moment, just happy that I just potentially scored. They release me, and hand me a script. They wrote me a script for ibuprofen 800 mg. Defeat. TLDR, don't drop a brick on your foot trying to break it and get pills from the ER, doesn't work. Was night manager at fast food establishment during college. There was a bitter prank rivalry between our establishment and the Subway next to us. After months of prank escalation, I crammed a rotting hamburger patty in the handle of the Subway manager's trunk lid so he went knuckle deep in rotting burger when he went home. That was the end of the prank war, and I've never forgiven myself for crossing the red line. I'm gonna rat my little sister out. During our parents' divorce and custody battle, we were forced to sit in on family counseling sessions. I was 12 and she was 8. We thought my mom was acting funny and might have been banging the counselor on the side for her own personal testimonial interests, still not confirmed. So we were pissed off because we loved our mom and our dad. It seemed like the counselor favored our mom over our dad, and it got rough sometimes watching him become outed by the only two adult forces who didn't love him in this world. Anyway, my little sister and I were left alone in his office, and she decided she was gonna take a shit in his little trash can to assert dominance. It was asserted. We never went back. Ugh, this was an embarrassing one that I hope no one ever finds out. One night a few years ago, we, my boyfriend and his family, get Chinese food from our favorite little place. For some reason this night it doesn't sit well with me. An hour after eating I get that intensely sick feeling, like you have to poop so bad that you want to throw up. Whatever, I go upstairs and destroy the bathroom. It's important to note, there's 2 bathrooms upstairs and none downstairs, which is like a little apartment where my boyfriend and I stay. After I'm sure my bowels are empty, I go back down to lay in bed. Thought I could nap it off. Nah, about 30 seconds after laying down I get the urge to go again. I run upstairs and to my horror, both bathrooms are occupied. His sister is refusing to get of the shower even though it's an _emergency_ and his dad is blowing up the other toilet, presumably suffering a similar fate to mine. I begrudgingly go sit in bed and contemplate my options as the bubbling in my gut grows worse. Bust down the bathroom door and traumatize his sister? Make the 30-minute drive home? No, it was urgent. I even thought about shitting my pants, against my will, and dealing with the embarrassment. God, I don't want to subject my future in-laws to that. I begrudgingly realize my only option is to go outside like nature intended. Their yard is very open and it was a super bright moonlit night, so there was no place to do it without feeling super exposed. Except for under the trampoline. My thought process was, no one has used the trampoline for years, and it's out of sight/walking range so no one could accidentally step in it. Great. I do my business, get soaked in the process, it was slightly raining and the trampoline was pouring water on me, clean up with napkins and wet wipes, come inside. Immediately throw up in the trash can from the shock/embarrassment/anxiety/sickness. Clean that up and immediately go to bed. Everything was fine for a few days, until my boyfriend's dad lightheartedly tells me how he was late for work that morning. The dog had rolled in some shit and he had to get a bath. I felt like throwing up all over again, but thankfully everyone just suspected it was some type of animal poop. Picking up a dude's head that fell off his rotting corpse when I worked at a mortuary transport company is definitely up there. Also picking up a 5-year-old kid who had a bookcase fall on him. Feeling all the broken bones moving in his tiny body fucked me up good. If we're talking behavior, I definitely attempted to ruin friends' relationships in my teenage years cause I was a bitter and lonely asshole. Seeing them happy only made me feel worse so I wanted to drag them down to my level. Luckily their relationships were stronger than my bullshit in most cases. Edit, I've gotten a few messages asking questions about the mortuary job and whether or not these were the worst calls I've ever had, so I figured I'd post an old comment from a different thread. Trigger warning for suicide. Witnessed a woman pretty much break over the headless body of her son. Used to work for a mortuary livery service. I mostly picked up from retirement homes and from people's houses where they had a hospice nurse watching over them, but would occasionally get calls from the local coroner's office. One night I was sent out to a call not far from where I lived. Place was surrounded by cops. They lead me and my partner to the bathroom, where a guy had blown his head off with a shotgun in the shower. It was a mess, as you can probably imagine, but by this point it wasn't super out of the ordinary for me. I'd picked up suicides before, as well as overdoses, decom, kids, so I was pretty numb to it. We got the guy into a bag and loaded him up on the gurney, and were out the door at the worst possible time. The dude's mother was outside now, having been called by someone I guess. She started hysterically screaming, which immediately put me on edge. I had dealt with crying and mourning loved ones every day, even when I had to pick up the kid, his parents were already ushered into another room. But blood-curdling screams right in front of me? This was a first. A cop tried to grab her but she managed to wriggle away from him, running up to the gurney and pretty much collapsing onto it, sobbing uncontrollably and babbling nonsense. It was the most raw and unfiltered emotion I had ever seen. She was clutching onto the gurney and like rocking back and forth, to the point that I had to grab the cart before the whole thing toppled over onto the front lawn. I stood there for around 5 minutes, with a front row seat to unrivaled agony with no way to really hide from it, before a cop had stepped in and tried to pull her away, saying that we had to take him. She eventually relented and we got the body loaded into the car, and from there it was business as usual. The reason that one stuck with me so much is because, well, it was almost like looking into my own future. I was suicidal at the time, and a shotgun in the shower was exactly how I planned to do it. Only reason I was waiting was because I wanted to be in my own place, so my roommate didn't have to find me. The dude was even around my age. It was a weird feeling of almost like standing over my own body, and when I saw the woman's breakdown, I could only see my own mom. It was at that moment that I decided that my mom would never scream and cry like that because of something I did. While the feelings are definitely still there and I still think about death a lot, that night was when I decided that I would never do it, no matter how much it hurts. What sucks is that it almost made the pain worse. Before, I knew I had an out, a way to make this miserable shit end, but after that I just felt trapped. Don't want to live but now I can't die. Fuck lol. Surgical tech here. One of my patients was at the very tail end of pregnancy, but the baby wound up dying. She was in denial, and refused care, and carried the dead baby for almost a month. I was on the team to get her a C-section when she finally came to get it out. The baby's skin was like wet paper, any pressure anywhere caused it to tear. The muscles underneath had started to rot. The bones were mostly broken down to the point of providing no structure, so it moved like a baby-shaped water balloon. Face looked like something from a horror movie. Smell was easily the worst I've experienced. Room was eerie silent, including the mother who was awake, normal for C-sections. Been a surgical tech for over 6 years, and that was by far the most fucked up thing I've ever seen or done. That case was almost 4 years ago, and still pops into my mind regularly. My hometown is generally pretty middle class to poor. There's a bunch of rich people that live in the woods and one of them had a kid that went to our high school and bullied the fuck out of the kids that weren't as wealthy. That shithead grew up and bought a Camaro last summer and removed the muffler so it would be the loudest fucking thing in town. On New Year's Eve of 2021, he decided to ruin a town tradition and lapped the town common with it during the tree lighting ceremony. While people were caroling and giving thanks. Summer of last year, me and a friend decided it was time to get revenge because nobody wanted to do anything about it. My friend's dad owned a junkyard and they recently got an old train horn from a busted diesel that ended up there. We spent a good week getting it set up in the back of his work truck and decided to wait on it for a little while. A month or so later, we found out he was having a party of some kind with other rich folks and his family but we didn't know what it was about, so we carefully parked outside his house on the opposite side of his fence. Right as it was starting, we blasted the train horn and peeled out before anyone knew what happened. News got out later and we found out the party we bombed was actually a wake for his late grandfather. You know how people bag up their leaves and leave them out by the street? As a teen we used to go out at night and dump them back out on people's lawns. Thinking about it now I would be so pissed if someone did that to me. When I was about 15 a neighbor or ours stopped us in the road and chewed us out for riding our go-karts in the road. This despite the fact that it was a dirt road in a rural area which was the perfect place for riding go-karts. He was a complete asshole about it too. I don't know where I got the idea from but I promptly went home, called the electric company, pretended to be the neighbor, and told them I wanted my electricity turned off as we were moving. It was the 80s so they just looked the account up by name and address and promptly entered my request in the system. I'm sure it was just a minor inconvenience for them but they deserved it in my opinion. Sometimes you can do really fucked up things without any intent or awareness. I was young and with a very nice woman who was struggling with some physical issues that resulted in a severe depression. We weren't living together, but I was regularly getting up early and going over to her place for breakfast and to kind of just check in and let her know I was there for her. I went drinking with some friends one night and I overslept the next morning. I called her to let her know I wouldn't make it. She committed suicide that day, before I got back from work. I know, now, that what happened wasn't my fault, and I wasn't responsible, at least not in some overt way. We all make our own decisions. Still, I will always wish I hadn't been careless and overslept that day. If I had the chance to change one decision I've made in my life, this would be it. The day before I stopped drinking alcohol altogether, I was in a really dark place for a number of reasons. And I was absolutely using alcohol as a crutch. One of the reasons why I was in such a bad place, emotionally, was because my cousin was in decline due to glioblastoma. I was actively seeing this person, that I loved dearly, lose his sense of self and ability to understand conversations and situations. And he was young, just turned 50. There was a lot of light in the beginning, but considering that glioblastoma is effectively a stage-less brain cancer, it was almost guaranteed he would lose the battle. The day that I stopped drinking altogether was the day that I was supposed to drive him to a research institute for his monthly treatment and check in. It was the only time I was asked to take on that level of responsibility, as his wife would normally take him. I helped in a bunch of different ways, like hanging out with him when he'd otherwise be alone, but this appointment was pretty big. I depressedly drank myself into a stupor the night before and missed our meet-up time. ID said that I'd be there no matter what, and I wasn't. The appointment happened, and he reassured me everything was okay as he knew the battle was over anyway. But I will never forgive myself for that. Even typing this out makes me feel like the biggest piece of shit. I wish I were sober then. Edit, a lot of people responded to this. Thank you for the kind words and reassurance. EDIT2, even more people responded to this and it's had me thinking. I think it's just time that I heard this stuff. This happened almost 2 years ago now. When I do something that I regret, it becomes a loud voice in the silence. That's usually when I think about regrettable stuff and it's hard to turn off. This question made that voice really loud and I think I'm going to try and reaffirm myself in those moments. It was a huge lesson in life and I really do believe he'd be proud of me as many have suggested. Thanks again. You're all disgusting. Anyways, I made the Pringles can fleshlight once. These answers are veering wildly between funny and depressing as fuck. Not the most fucked up. The roommates of my girlfriend were making her life very difficult, leaving garbage rotting in her room while on vacation, piercing our condoms and more. I used to pee on their bath sponges. Never told them. My 12-year-old dumbass thought, after watching videos on YouTube, that applying honey to your eyes directly can change/lighten its color naturally. Boy, it was painful. I stopped doing it after a week. Gun folks, what would it take for you to get rid of your guns? Conversely, anti-gun folks, what would it take for you to get a gun? Better PTSD services provided by the military. My husband is a vet of Desert Storm. We do not keep a gun in our home even though we both know proper gun procedures as we were both raised by fathers who served in military in addition to serving in the military. I grew up in the South and knew how to shoot by age 10 and even owned a small .22 in middle/high school. He is bad around 4th of July and New Year's and has been very honest with me that he does not trust himself with a weapon in our home. So we don't keep one. Even with a lockbox and other options. We do not have the temptation in our home. I do not fear he would ever hurt me, but I do think if he was going through a rough enough time he may hurt himself. We have been able to get him some help through my insurance. I work for the city so we have pretty good coverage, but it's something he struggles with even with help. Edit. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who has replied and reached out. He is doing so much better than when we met 10 years ago. He's been in and out of therapy for 5 years. Some practices have worked, some have not. It's been about 3 years since his last really bad night, triggered by 4th of July fireworks. We recently talked about getting a handgun for home safety. We are going to visit a gun range and take a safety course in the spring and see how he's feeling after. If we do, it would be kept in a lockbox that I know the code at first and then eventually him. I'm neither one, but my mother was profoundly anti-weapon. Then she got robbed on the farm, midday on plain sight. They just came, took batteries from our tractors, hopped back in the car and drove away. Mom called the cops, they didn't care, didn't even want to come to take a deposition. So she asked me to teach her how to use the Winchester we had at home. If the cops don't even bother to come and see what is wrong, we surely will have time enough to dig a hole for the next robbers. I collect historical firearms so a lot of the pro or anti sentiments don't really apply. My guns are locked up and some I don't even have ammo for. I definitely could get to them quickly if I had to, but defense is secondary to the history of them. Therefore I couldn't see any good reason to get rid of a hobby that I enjoy and is supplemental to other hobbies of mine. I gave my 270 Remington to my son who likes to hunt. I don't enjoy it that much anymore and he gives me meat in wrapped packages. I grew up without guns in my home and as an adult I never really had a desire for one. I wasn't anti-gun per se, but I did care for them personally. Well, I was working in the grocery business when the pandemic hit. I have never seen people act like that before. I was the assistant manager of the grocery department. So we were in charge of the dairy wall, milk, eggs, cheese, and yogurt, all dry groceries, and all the frozen stuff. As the manager I was able to do everything in the department and I often did. I had been in this role for a couple years, and I was the go-to guy for writing orders. I would decide what groceries to put on the shelves and what ones to build the displays of. I had a lot of contacts and conversations with suppliers, and warehouse that sold groceries. Like Tropicana, UNFI, KEHE, and 100 more smaller ones. We had been hearing lots of rumors and talk about a disease spreading in China, and the like. We had a guy who was deep into conspiracies and he was telling us about it daily. He was a little crazy so we just sort of rolled our eyes. Then I had a conversation with a guy who had a pretty high up job title at a big grocery distributor. He told me he was starting to see some shortages on stuff he has never seen short on in 30 years. Then the national news came out and quarantines were mentioned. The grocery store was chaos. I worked like 100 hours in 7 days. We were calling everyone trying to get groceries orders and they did not have stuff. Anything imported was out, all staples were out or low. It was scary. I started thinking about my family and if people really can't get food things could get interesting. So I purchased a pistol. It is easy to have opinions about COVID now, but this was before we really knew anything. I was not able to get orders at my store, with no refill ADAs, and I saw people acting insane. Admittedly, this caused me to become fearful, not really of getting sick, but of people acting irrational and bad things happening. TLDR. Fear of food shortage and global pandemic made me buy a gun. I live in Germany. Getting a gun took me courses and like a year in waiting time. I use it for sports. Nothing will make me give them up except if the state makes something illegal to own. We have strict rules on firearms. I can't carry or load it anywhere else except the range or competitions. Edit. Since people keep asking and I wrote it a bit confusing. You can carry firearms to the range and back. Just not like in a holster or concealed. They must be transported in a container securely, unloaded and separate from the ammo. A range bag with a lock on it is sufficient. EDIT2. Hunters have their own license. They have different rules than sports shooters. I do not know them by heart. If we have a German hunter here he can elaborate. In general hunters have much more responsibility and a longer verification and validation process. Deleted. A tank. I'd be more than happy to trade my guns for way more money than they're worth. As a Chicagoan that has survived, resisted, 2 muggings and a home invasion, there are literally no words you could use to convince me to disarm. I don't have any guns. Sadly, my friend was borrowing them on a fishing trip in Alaska when the boat capsized and they all sank to the bottom of lake. Well, I own a gun because someone threatened my wife and broke into my house and destroyed a lot of stuff, so when crime stops. As an owner? Probably not much. It sounds strange, but getting into firearms is what got me out of depression. I sent my gun home with my mother so she could lock it in her safe because I was suicidal. I won't see it again for a long time, until I've gotten plenty of help. EDA, thank you all, especially whoever sent the Reddit care resources my way, for all your support. It's really great how the support from a group of internet strangers can really fuel the fire in me to get better. There's no sarcasm here, I appreciate each and every one of you more than you know. Thank you. Edit 2, this turned into my most upvoted, most awarded, and most responded to comment I've ever had overnight. I want to say thank you all again for your support, awards, everything. To those of you who have gone/are going through the same struggles as me, stay strong. Each and every one of you is truly amazing. I'll get a gun when my internal monologue stops telling me to kill myself. I'm not anti-gun, I just know I'll be safer if I didn't have one in easy access.